I'd like to welcome Anna Dietrich to the stage. She's the Director of Industry and Strategy at Community Air Mobility Initiative, also known as CAMI. So we're going to be talking about UAM, but more specifically, the current aircraft certification standardization landscape. We're going to be talking about commonalities between electric and automated aircraft. And then we're also going to be talking about how communities can get involved in that. So welcome, Anna. Thanks so much for dedicating some time with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for some of the, we can hear and see you fine. Can you hear and see me okay?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, and I'm sorry your picture disappeared on me on the slide for some reason, but it's also available in the handout section. If everybody wants to go over to the handout section, you can download today's slides. But okay, so I have a couple questions prepared for you, if that's okay. And then we'll see if the audience members have anything for us.
Sounds great.
Okay. So tell me about your current role at CAMI. I know we met a couple weeks back, but I'd like you to share that with the audience. And what are some of your primary focal points right now?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, Yolanka Wolf and I started a nonprofit organization called the Community Air Mobility Initiative, CAMI for short. And we did that out of a growing realization that the AAM industry, the advanced air mobility industry, was sort of charging ahead full steam with technology development, with standards development, with engagement with the federal level, and really hadn't invested a lot of energy in the folks that actually have to make this work in our daily lives, which is our state and local decision makers. So state DOTs, town planners, transportation planners, people that figure out where the buses go and where the subways go and make the trains run on time. Like those folks really weren't being prepared for what we were seeing coming. And we thought that, this whole thing was going to go better for everybody if we could give those folks the tools that they needed to approach this new space from a position of education and sort of more comfort with what was coming their way. So we started CAMI to do just that. So we've produced a number of resource files, which are freely available on our website. We have financial support from all different facets of the AAM ecosystem, equipment manufacturers, states, the whole spectrum. And then we run a urban air policy collaborative, which is a intensive deep dive cohort we do for a limited number of jurisdictions at a time, with a set curriculum that goes through everything from, what's the anatomy of an eVTOL aircraft, to how do you mitigate some of the potential negative impacts on your community, to how do you get the maximum value out of this for as many people as possible that live in your jurisdiction. So really trying to give them, like I said, the tools that they need, the education that they need. These people are fantastic at what they do, and their domain expertise is phenomenal. But this is something that's brand new. So really trying to just get them up that learning curve.
Very cool. And I'm sorry, I don't think I caught this in your introduction. How long have you had CAMI around?
We started CAMI about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay. So yeah, a little newer. How's it been going in the last 2.5
years? The response has just been really fantastic. I think it's been as the word gets out, as things go, the kind of organic expansion and people coming in. And I think it's, we've really produced a phenomenal package of information and curriculum at this point, and that's something that we're continuing to expand as we go.
Very cool. Very cool. So I understand, and you touched on this a little bit in your intro, you're involved a lot in standards development within the UAM sector. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of a step back, which is one of the reasons why I think that we're able to see the advances that we are seeing in innovations in aviation right now, everything from, electrification to automation. I think it is in large part to do with the shift to performance-based rules that we managed to make happen back with the Part 23 rewrite. So Amendment 64 of Part 23 was published in 2017. I sat on the ARC, the team that worked through that process and did that rewrite. And our focus there was to be more future-proof with the regulations. You're never going to be completely future-proof. I mean, people are people, but we really wanted to set up a regulatory structure in which it would be possible to accommodate new technologies and to fit things that we hadn't contemplated into this regulatory structure. So we did that by focusing on what are the sort of key bits that ensure safety. So the safety intent of the existing rules, as opposed to the specifics of how you would go about meeting that safety intent, acknowledging that there's probably many, many other ways to design and build safe aircraft. So that shift to performance-based standards with the Part 23 rewrite was then supported by a significant investment from the industry in generating consensus standards, because while your certification basis was now very high level, you still needed to have a means by which you could show that you'd met that safety intent. So the industry stepped up to create this library of standards to support this Amendment 64 of Part 23. That was really how I got, I had been involved previously, but that was really, I got thrown in. I was a founding executive member of F44, and we just off to the races. So this was an ASTM F44 General Aviation Committee was stood up just to do that. So very involved with that still. Also involved in the standards that are done to support light sport aircraft, which is even smaller than most Part 23 aircraft. And as we've moved into some of these newer technologies, I keep kind of adding to my alphabet soup of involvement. So working with a couple of the other ASTM committees on unmanned aircraft, and just yesterday we had a symposium on autonomy in aviation with one of the advisory committees within ASTM. Also participate with SAE efforts and with RTCA efforts as well. So really trying to pull in all of those expertise and divide and conquer this huge amount of work that has to be done to support this new industry.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll get to the EDGE reports in a moment, but that's what I love about your contributions for the EDGE reports as well. Kind of talks about what still needs to be done in terms of standardization for those technologies. But before we get to the EDGE side of things, you had made a really good point about UAM in terms of electrification and autonomous aircraft and how they intersect in some ways. Can you explain to our audience what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we are seeing with kind of this new explosion in innovation in aviation is there's a lot of focus on kind of the urban air mobility, the flying taxis, right? Uber Elevate was the big proponent of that. And that really is a combination of several different technologies and several different sort of new streams of effort that are kind of maturing at the same time in the space. Two of those main ones are the electrification of aviation and adding autonomy and varying levels of automation to aviation. And while those are coming together in the UAM space, there's no requirement that they have to be in the same aircraft. So there's a lot of electrification happening on conventional aircraft retrofits of putting electric engine on a traditional airplane that's just conventionally flown, right? There's a lot of autonomy that's being invested in even just retrofitting existing aircraft. So you can have a conventionally powered aircraft that's fully autonomous, and you can have an electric powered aircraft that's fully humanly piloted, right? They don't have to go together. And I think it's important as you think about requirements to acknowledge that those are separable pieces. It makes it so you have smaller elephants to eat for one thing, but also allows you to focus on the individual technical aspects of those individual streams of effort. So I like to just kind of point that out, that these are in fact separate streams of effort. They are often in the UAM space used on the same aircraft, but to different degrees, right? There are some UAM aircraft that are proposed to be hybrid. You could say that the original UAM aircraft is a conventional helicopter. So there's a lot of, sort of a spectrum of both of these things happening at the same time. And you can also look at the spectrum of automation and autonomy that's happening in the space as well. Some aircraft are flown by a pilot that's heavily assisted. Some aircraft are intended to be, completely self-flying. So there's a big spectrum on both sides, and sort of this multidimensional space for each individual project.
Right. And I think you were kind of getting to this point too. But I had another question about the small autonomous aircrafts. Do you think that they're here to stay? And then if so, what are some of the risks and what are some of the advantages around that?
I think we're at the point where it's safe to say that this technology is here to stay. It's going to continue to evolve. The use cases are going to continue to evolve. What we have in mind today when we think of a small UAS may not be what we see, promulgated through in the future. But I think the basic concept of aircraft that are capable of doing a lot on their own is one that we're going to be is going to be with us for quite some time, and probably expanding in scope as we go. I think that, that every new technology has risks. And it's interesting because some of those risks are substitutes for risks that we've had already in society. So I was having a conversation yesterday with folks about the introduction of the automobile and how pedestrian deaths were a big new risk for cars in cities, especially before we'd figured out sidewalks and things like that. But no one was getting kicked in the head by a horse if they were driving a car, right? So it was, you were trading kind of one set of operational risks for another. And so I think we're seeing some of that where like you're replacing some, at risk of human error with risk of having a faulty system, perhaps. But so there's some trading of risks happening. But I think overall, the more capabilities that we give people, the more options that we give society for how to accomplish the things that we need and get ourselves and our goods where we need to go, I think that's a net positive. And I think that's sort of the beauty of the certification work and the standards development work, is to figure out a way to provide, another term from yesterday that I'll have to give credit to Wes Ryan, who's at NASA Ames for, is this idea of risk leadership. So not just mitigation, because risk mitigation, like, you're just not going to do anything. If mitigating risk means minimizing it, then you're never going to do anything new. So instead, risk leadership of what are the appropriate risks that we want to take as a society? What are the appropriate, trade-offs for the benefit that we're getting, and those kinds of questions I find really fascinating. And we've navigated those for other new technologies in the past. And I think we're kind of in the thick of navigating it for these new ones.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing those insights. A little bit of a shift and maybe a loaded question, but what are the main changes you see coming into general aviation ecosystem that might make our lives easier?
Well, I think the whole vision of advanced air mobility, which I will say is broader than urban air mobility. So AAM tends to include both urban air mobility, which is sort of the metropolitan core taxi eVTOL sort of service, as well as regional air mobility. And there was a really neat paper that NASA published about regional air mobility and how some of these new technologies can facilitate that. So it's a whole spectrum, again, very complicated, big space of technology. And I think it comes back to making it, like I said, making it easier for us to get ourselves and our stuff where we want to go. And if we're able to, streamline cargo shipments, if we're able to make aviation a safer and more affordable and more accessible form of transportation, I think there is the potential for huge benefit there. It's, it's providing new options, it's providing new access, right? So I think there's a lot of potential benefit here. The interesting thing is this is really more of a technology push right now than a market pull. There's very few people out there saying, oh, you know what I really want to do today? I want to fly to work today. We've all had that fantasy when we're stuck in traffic, right? But like, it's not something that you're like actively, it's not a need you're actively out there trying to source, right? So this is a new technology, kind of like when we got our smartphones, of like, hey, this is going to be really cool. You don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be really cool. And it's going to be interesting to see how that sort of plays out in society as more and more people kind of catch on and as it becomes more and more mainstream.
Yeah, so I have a follow-up to that, actually, because you made a really good point that I hadn't even thought about in terms of this concept. But we were talking in previous conversations of how local communities can get involved in the UAM movement. So what did you mean by that? Could you elaborate on that more?
I think it's not only can they, I think it's really essential that they do. So, we have an opportunity to mindfully create a new type of transportation infrastructure. And it's a type of transportation infrastructure that requires a whole lot less capital than the ones that we currently have, right? We're not building miles and miles and miles of highway. We're building vertiports. We're building these very contained spaces that don't take up a lot of land, that can be built on top of other things that we already have. They're not going to have to take up more space necessarily. So there's this phenomenal opportunity to, like I said, really mindfully craft, how do we want this to integrate into our daily lives? And it's these hyper local decisions that are going to influence that. Where that vertiport is, how equitably are the benefits and the negative impacts of that service distributed among its neighboring neighborhoods, right? Like, those types of questions are things that if we pay attention to them now, we can potentially answer them in ways that maximize the benefit to the maximum number of people going forward. If we aren't mindful of them now, we'll get somewhere. Things will be, it'll be okay. We'll move forward. But we're likely to end up with similar situations that we have with our existing built infrastructure, which, there's equity issues, there's, race issues, there's disadvantaged neighborhoods carrying a disproportionate level of the negative impacts of this infrastructure, right? So we want to try to, if we can, set ourselves up for success to avoid as much of that as possible with this sort of new opportunity that we have with urban air mobility, and encourage the communities to engage ahead of time instead of trying to play catch up, and to understand what is this and what does it look like and how can it benefit me? And how can I minimize the negative impacts? Anytime you change anything, there's positives and negatives, right? Nothing is 100% positive. It's just not real life. So understanding that, what are those associated negatives and how can we minimize them so we can maximize the benefit? And that's a lot of the information that Cami is trying to produce and to share with these decision makers, so that they're not caught flat-footed when some operator, some manufacturer comes into their jurisdiction and says, hey, I want to put this thing here. Right. And they have two options at that point if they don't have the information they need. One is just to like, no, go away. I don't even want to think about this. And the other is probably just to kind of get pushed over and let them do whatever they want. I think having UAM in our communities is going to be good for a lot of people. I think it's something we should move forward with, but I think we should do it smartly. Right. And so equipping these people with this information of like, okay, well, we can put one here, but we want to make sure we're mitigating in this way. So let's also do this. And we want to make sure that we're also increasing access for this community. So can you put a pair in so that you have one network node over in this neighborhood in addition to the one over here that you proposed, right? So that kind of can enable them to have a dialogue and to be part of the planning stages of rolling this out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it sounds like you're way ahead of the game with your organization.
We're trying to, right? We're trying to not have to play catch up.
So, go ahead. Were you going to add?
Oh, I was just going to say the example that a lot of these communities use as a situation where they are still playing catch up is with the ground-based ride-hailing services, so Uber and Lyft and those kinds of things. They did not see that coming. They were not approached by it. It caused significant impacts to traffic and parking in ways that they were just not prepared for, and they've been kind of scrambling to recover from it ever since. So they are actually very excited to have the information that they need to be ready for this as it's coming.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Before we shift, because I want to talk a little bit about EDGE, because you have one previously published report. I want to talk about, your involvement with those and your upcoming report. But before we do that, there are two questions. One is from Robert. He asked, is Cami looking at community noise impact of UAM?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that is one of the most obvious potential negative impacts of this. I will say, though, that that's one of the reasons why eVTOL aircraft are an enabling technology for UAM. They can be really quiet. So I don't think it's going to be as significant of an impact as many folks expect. But how to measure that noise, how to appropriately set noise levels for a given community environment, those are all questions that Cami's working with.
Very cool. And actually Pranab, so Dr. Pranab Saha was our guest speaker last month. Thanks for joining today, Pranab. He asked a question. I know Joby is one electric air taxi being worked on. There must be other ones also. Are any of them out already?
There are dozens, if not hundreds, of electric air taxi concepts in development. To my knowledge, none have been actually certified.
Oh, okay.
Many are getting close.
Yeah,
but
good to know. So I want to share the current EDGE report out with everyone. It's a link out to that specific title. In my next question, I want to shift over to your contributions on EDGE. And for those of you that aren't familiar with our EDGE research reports, we started those, I believe, in 2019. Oh, I'm sorry. I think somebody can't hear me. Interesting. Let me turn my mic on and off. Okay. Dean, is that better? Okay, that's weird. This is a voice over IP, so sometimes if your connection is a little wonky, it can be. Sven can hear us, Robert can hear us. Okay. Well, I'll continue on, and Dean, you will get a auto replay as well, so you can always revisit this interview and reach out to us if you have any questions we weren't able to get to. But with the EDGE research reports, so we publish 2 to 3 of them per month, and we bring in contributors like Anna, who are experts on a specific technology or topic. And in most cases, we're talking about unsettled technologies. We're talking about gaps analysis, like UAM. What do we currently need in terms of standardization? Where do we see that technology going? Not just in terms of standardization, but the effects on things like noise within the environment. And I know that you had published one, let's see, you were the co-editor with Dr. Ravi Rajamani, who's our editor for one of our journals. And it was called Unsettled Issues Regarding the Certification of Electric Aircraft. So that makes sense. You contributed to that. And that was published at the beginning of 2021. How was that experience working with Dr. Rajamani?
Oh, Robbie is fantastic. I hadn't really been embarrassingly aware of the whole Edge Report ecosystem before he reached out to me. So really glad he did, for no other reason than that it turned me on to that all of these amazing resources exist. So no, it was very, very fun, very collaborative. We each brought different sort of pieces to the puzzle to put it all together and cover the full general aviation space. So yeah, it was a I think one of my favorite parts about doing the Edge reports, which Robbie and I really kind of dug into, is the interviews with other experts in the space and getting those perspectives and having this opportunity and this excuse to spend an hour on Zoom with somebody and really dive into a topic. So it kind of is an opportunity to geek out and have some fun with other people that really are passionate about the same thing. So no, it was a great experience putting it together, and hopefully some folks have found it useful.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And I did share the title out, but I should also mention, I know it's up on the slide, so many of you probably read it already, but Beth Ellen Deibler, who is our product manager for Edge Research Reports, we wanted to make sure that, we were not only sharing the title itself, but we're going to select 5 people, or Beth Ellen is, she's going to select 5 winners at random. After today's live session, she'll reach out to you and give you a free copy of Anna's previous Edge publication, just so you have an opportunity to read it. And I know that you have a second report, and it's entitled Unsettled Topics in the General Aviation Autonomy Landscape. So again, makes sense that you contributed to that. This time edited by yourself alone. Can you give us a bit of a spoiler on it?
Yeah, so this one honestly kind of got a little bit out of hand. It's quite long at this point. And maybe that's why it's been in editing for a while. Maybe they're trying to trim it down to something more reasonable. But no, it's intended to be sort of this, puddle deep and ocean wide sort of review of the different pieces that have to come together to have a significant extent of autonomy on a general aviation aircraft. So looking at a number of the different enabling technologies, detect and avoid, all of those sorts of, basic pieces, as well as then going kind of through, interactions with the pilot, interactions with the airspace, kind of all of these like different angles from which to look at the project. So you've got perspectives from systems developers, from aircraft manufacturers, from operators, Part 135 operators, from pilots, talk to a number of the different standards development organizations in the space, not just SAE, but kind of the whole alphabet soup range of them. It covers remotely piloted aircraft, self-piloted aircraft, occupied unmanned aircraft. So all of those sort of different permutations. And then, what does it actually like, what are the general considerations that you should put into this? What is the different pieces and the airspace integration and training, and then try to pull it all back together at the end with some summary and challenges and recommendations. But it is a bit of a beast. But I wanted to look at all of these different pieces because people often ask me, like, what is the single, biggest challenge that we have to overcome to make this happen? And they want an answer like, this one particular system. If we could only crack this, how to make this one black box, we'd be good. And it is way more complicated than that. It's not getting one boulder to the top of the mountain. It's getting all 30 of these marbles to the top of the hill at the same time, and in a way where they can coalesce into something useful. So this is my attempt to look at all the marbles and try to figure out how we're going to get them all together at the same time.
When it sounds like, and you touched on this a little bit, there's multiple solutions. So it's not even just standards. I think you mentioned professional development as well, sort of like courses that complement that, would you say?
Well, so when I mentioned training, I actually meant in the context of how do we train pilots and operators to work with this new technology.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a need for that other bit too, but I didn't get into it.
That does sound really long. All right. So I have 2 final questions. Let me check the chat real quick. If anybody else, let's see, David did have a question. Do you think UAM, AAM aircrafts will be unmanned aircrafts, autonomous aircrafts? You mark that as a question.
So the terminology here is a bit of a mess. And that's one of the things that I tried to untangle in the most recent Edge report. It's been there's many other efforts out there that are trying to untangle this. So an uncrewed aircraft, which is the new terminology that the FAA is moving forward with, is uncrewed instead of unmanned. So an uncrewed aircraft simply means that it's not being controlled from on board the aircraft. The pureness of the definition doesn't imply whether or not there's people on board. So there can be an occupied uncrewed aircraft, or there can just simply be an uncrewed aircraft. As with everything, I feel like I've said this a lot, there's a spectrum in terms of intention for how urban air mobility aircraft are going to be approached from this perspective. So there are some manufacturers and operators that are taking what's called the direct to autonomy route, where they are having their plan is to launch with a fully uncrewed, occupied urban air mobility aircraft that would be controlled from the ground, from a ground control station with, a multi-vehicle supervisor or an operator or something like that. Now, whether or not that's considered autonomous is in some ways splitting hairs, right? Because the aircraft has to have a certain level of capability to be able to operate in that environment. Even if there is a pilot on board that aircraft controlling that aircraft, there also may be a significant level of autonomy associated with that. So yes, there will be autonomous aircraft, there will be uncrewed occupied aircraft, and there will be a whole spectrum and combinations of onboard piloted, remotely piloted, varying degrees of autonomy. But it's a big space.
Awesome. Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. Okay, so let me see. The last thing I wanted to really ask you was, what are some of your plans for the future? Which I feel like is such a loaded question after everything you just explained.
Oh gosh, yeah. So no, my as I've gotten a little bit farther along in my career, a little bit older, I have tried to adopt a little bit more of a philosophy of, like, let it be easy. Not that there aren't super hard problems to solve, but if it isn't hard, don't make it hard.
Sure.
So, and I think that that's something that I'm applying to kind of my own plans for the future. So I have a few projects that I have my teeth sunk pretty deeply into, both with Cami and, with other professional activities that I have, consulting, and I'm working with a company right now on certifying their autonomous aircraft. So, there's a lot of different irons in the fire that I think are going to take, a significant amount of time to work through. So I want to see some of those through to completion. I'm going to go camping in Death Valley next month. So that's a real concrete plan that I'm looking forward to. And yeah, I just, I think that there's so much happening in this space right now. There's so many smart people trying to solve these legitimately hard problems, and anything that I can do to try to help provide, some support of finding that common ground and that collaboration and that consensus, and to try to move us all forward in a right direction. Yeah. I'm happy to do that. So yeah, it's no grand announcements or anything like that, but just continuing to turn the wheel and try to move us all forward, and then find ways to collaborate and support that consensus as we move forward.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you're going on a vacation next month, you said? Next month? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I'm curious, do you have any advice? And you're juggling an awful lot between being an entrepreneur and, and running Cami. And I also know you have 2 small children, right?
Yeah. I do. Yeah. I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, 4.5 and 6.5 now.
Yeah.
They would be
Yes.
if I didn't add that. Yes. I'm trying to subtract months. They're like, no, I want every single one. So yeah, no, it's like I was saying, you can make things really hard if you let yourself. And I'm enough of a type A, MIT, all of that it's very tempting for me to, get in there and make things challenging when they don't necessarily have to be. So I'm really trying to back off of that, find ways of letting things be easy where they can be, to open up that mental and emotional energy and space for the things that really are worth investing in. And sometimes that's a hard problem, and sometimes that's going camping with your kids, right? So I think I have learned to, and I've gotten better at, though I think there's still room for improvement, to set boundaries, to really focus on the things that I find personally interesting, and really what really matters. How is this thing in front of me that I'm trying to choose to spend energy on going to make my life and the lives of people around me at any sphere, right? Like whether it's my kids or my community or my, the world at large, how is it going to make life better for people?
Right.
And if the answer to that isn't immediately obvious, then then I'm probably not going to do it. So, saying no has become a big part of that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it's fun, never a dull moment. Lots of amazing people that I've gotten to meet along the way. So yeah, I wouldn't change any
That's
of it.
awesome. That's great to hear. It looks like Marilyn in the chat, she would love for you to join the P35. So it's when you have in your free time.
I thought I was on
Yeah.
the list. I'm not good about going to meetings, I confess.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And those of you that continue to put any questions in the chat, I'll definitely pull those and share those with Anna. We do have to move on to Kelly McCann, our next speaker, and then kind of wrap things up for today. But thank you so much for joining us today. All of your expertise and sharing all of your insights. I really appreciate it, especially your contributions to the EDGE reports. I'm really looking forward to this next massive EDGE report to read. I can't wait.